Welcome to episode 3 of Astronomy of the Puranas. Today we will learn about Mount Meru, which is an extremely important part of Puranic cosmology. So let me show you the new texts for today. There's 2 new texts today, and then we'll go through all the things that we've learned so far and then return to the new texts and see what the new items are. So the new text is 6 and 7. Now, in 5, Shuka gave the basic structure of Bhumandala. He said, yeah. Well, let's check. Maybe it's 4. No. He says, our island is in the middle of that mandala. Its globe is like a beautiful lotus flower at the center of revolving spaces within revolving spaces, extending for countless yojana like leaves around that lotus bud. So we explored that. He's presenting the idea of a collection of circular things called a mandala. And observationally, we're in the middle of it. Now, in today's text, he begins to describe that thing that we live on in the middle of this Bhumandala. Esham madhye ilavartam nama abhyantara varsham yasya nabhyam avastita sarvata suvarnaha kulagiri rajo meru dvipayama samunnaha karnika bhuta Kuvalaya Kamalasya Murdhani Dvatrimshat Sahasra Yojana Vitato Mule Sodash Sahasram Tavat Antar Bhumyam Pravishtaha. So here what he says is, and we're just going to read what he's saying now. We'll figure out what it means in a bit. Here he's saying at the center of this field, at the center of these is the field named Ilavrita, which means the solid place. At the center of these, we seem to have skipped. Here we go. Sorry, we skipped this 6. Yasmin Navavarshani Navayojana Sahasrayan Yashtabhir Maryadagiribi Suvibhaktani Bhavanti. In this island that's in the middle of Bhumandala. Okay, so this is the scope. So this, he described, like, it looks like a beautiful lotus bud in the middle of many petals or in the middle of many leaves, and they're all circling this bud. In that bud, there's 9 varshas, which means 9 fields. 9 kind of plains, 9 flat places, 9 places where you can live, habitable places. In this globe, there are 9 fields extending for 9,000 yojanas each. There are 8 borders, so if there's 9 of them, there'll be 8 borders between them, become very clearly differentiated by mountains. Very clearly differentiated can also mean it's impossible almost to traverse between them. Suvibhaktini. Then the verse that we just read. Of all of these, at the center of all those fields. So now he's talking about the center of Bhumandala is this globe. And then on this globe, there's also all these separated fields. They're difficult to traverse between. But in the center of all those fields is this place, which he refers to with the pronoun this, which means it's the one that we're on. And it's called Ilavrita, which means the place where the flow has stopped. So it means this is the solid place. At its center, penetrating down into its core, is the most important of all geographical structures. The entirely radiant Meru. Meru means the center line. So in the middle of this thing is Ilavrita, and in the middle of that is Meru. So there's this thing called Bhumandala, which is a collection of circles. Circles are always based on a center. So what's at the center of those circles? This thing called Bhu, which is like a bud, like a lotus bud. What's in the center of Bhu? This thing called Ilavrita. What's in the center of Ilavrita? This thing called Meru. And Meru is the center of the center of the center of the center. There's no further center. So at the center of these fields is the field named Ilavrita, the solid place at its center, penetrating down into its core, is the most important of all geographical structures, the entirely radiant Meru center line. It extends through the entire breadth of the island. It establishes the center of the central lotus of Bhumandala. Its peak diffuses to a dome 32,000 yojana. Its peak diffuses to a 32,000 yojana canopy dome. Seems a little bit messed up. As a result of encircling the center of center of Ilavrita for 16,000 yojanas. All right, so there's a lot to unpack in this. Let's unpack it. Really want to understand what this is. So let's return to our summary of points. Really? Okay. So here are the points. The first point is that what is Bhumandala? We're talking about the center of the center of the center of Bhumandala. So what's Bhumandala? Well, Bhumandala is not a geocentric flat Earth, although it can look that way and be described that way. Bhumandala literally means the place where we exist, because exist is the meaning of Bhu. And mandala, it means the center of a collection of circles, or the center of a circle, or the center around which things anchor. The sun is the true center of Bhumandala because the border of Bhumandala is defined by the extent of the sun's gravity. Yavad Aditya Tapti. These are all the points that were made in the texts. This was from the first text in this chapter. This sun-centered circular disc-like collection of planetary orbits, Jyotisham Ganai Chandramava, is what modern people call the heliocentric solar system. So Bhumandala is the heliocentric solar system, but Shuka will always describe how it appears to a geocentered human observer. So try to understand that whatever is the center of the thing depends upon where you're observing it from. You are always the center because you're the observer. So in short, Bhumandala is objectively heliocentric but subjectively geocentric, and Shuka will describe it subjectively, and it's not identical to the Earth. It's earthly. It's the solar system and the system of things around the Earth. The sun is not Bhu, the sun is Surya. So it's not called the Surya Mandala, although it is the Surya Mandala. It's called the Bhu Mandala because it's being described for people who exist on Bhu. That's where we exist. The sun actually facilitates Bhu. Now the next point is that the way that the Bhagavatam will describe cosmology will use metaphor. The solar system does not literally involve chariots, wheels, furrows, oceans, and islands. These are conceptual metaphors which are called vikalpa. And this is from the second statement in this chapter. Metaphors are useful intellectual devices. They're not myths. They're useful intellectual devices because they put unknowns into classes with things we know and understand. Modern science and education also utilize metaphor extensively. For example, gravity is a warp in the fabric of space like a ball in the middle of a suspended cotton cloth. Okay, now the third important point is the intention of Bhagavatam's astronomy is not really astronomy. The intention of Bhagavatam's astronomy or Puranic cosmology is spiritual enlightenment. So it's not going to be less than astronomy, but it's going to be more than astronomy, but it will have a different focus. So what it will consider extremely important and not that important, and therefore you can use rough numbers or generalizations, or it doesn't have to be exactly precise, will be different from what a person would feel is important if the astronomy itself is the goal. So how can you have a spiritual intent with astronomy? We can get to know the personality of an artist by experiencing their artwork. Similarly, we can begin to appreciate the transcendent qualities of Bhagavan by experiencing the tangible things of this world, because such things are composed of Bhagavan's qualities. This is the point made in the third text. Bhagavata Gunamayi Sthularupa Veshitam. Parikshit says this is why he wants Shuka to explain the dimensions and characteristics of Bhumandala. He explains that Shuka is uniquely qualified to explain Bhumandala for this purpose. Etat Guru Arhasi Anuvarnayitum. We should note that the king's interest in Bhumandala is as a yogi and a bhakta, and that Shuka's qualification to describe it is also because of his being a yogi and a bhakta. Neither of them are astronomy students nor teachers per se. This should not lead us to assume that Shuka's astronomy will be inaccurate or fictional. Quite the opposite. The king explicitly asked him to describe the real, tangible, relatively verifiable world called the Sthula Rupa. However, we should realize that Shuka will choose certain metaphors with certain flavor and imagery because the prime objective of both this teacher and this student is to evoke divine awe and inspiration from astronomy. Okay. Those points all came from Parikshit's inquiry to Shuka. Now, in the fourth text, Shuka begins to reply. The first thing that we learn from his reply is that he is not aiming to, what is it called? What is it called? What does it say when you refute? He's not aiming to refute any particular system of astronomy or cosmology. And that it's not that the Bhagavatam's system or description would invalidate another system. Why is that? It's because there's many ways to look at something, especially if something is very gigantic. There's many ways you can see it. There's many ways you can describe it. Bhumandala is impossible to exhaustively describe or even comprehend, is the first thing that Shuka says in the fourth text, in the beginning of his answer. It's impossible to describe it completely. What to speak of describe it, it's impossible to even comprehend it completely because it's an ever-evolving evolute of the mystifying qualities of Bhagavan. Even gods with their superhuman intellect and lifespan cannot fully explain it. This means there are infinite ways to comprehend and describe the cosmos, each with its own unavoidable limitations on validity and accuracy. This in turn means that the description Shuka will give in Bhagavatam does not invalidate descriptions others may give elsewhere. It would be against Bhagavatam's own words to pit its cosmology against that of, quote, modern science or anybody else. So that's one of the first points that we should understand. It's not claiming to be the only way to see the universe. The next point that he made is that the cosmology, the way that he will describe it, is primal or primordial. He calls it pradhanyena. Shuka says his description of Bhumandala will be pradhanyena, which means for pradhan. And what does pradhan mean? Pradhan means what's really important. And it also means what's primary and primal. So besides meaning primary, pradhan is also applied contextually as a cosmological term referring to the primordial root cosmos. It's actually a cosmological term, pradhan, which basically means like singularity. Shuka's statement therefore conveys several meanings. One, he will describe only what he considers very relevant and important about Bhumandala. He can't describe everything or describe it from every angle. Two, he will describe that only in ways that are relevant to the primary objective, which is to obtain intuition of Bhagavan via the cosmos. And three, his description maybe talks about Bhumandala and how it's evolved now, or maybe talk about it in some previous evolute or some primal stage of it. Or he may talk about it in its theoretical shape. That's what is meant by pradhanyena. Those are all the introductory points, and that covers up to the fourth text. Today we did the sixth and the seventh, so we have one more old one to cover. And that would be the one where he actually starts to describe the structure. What is Bhumandala? So what we learned there in the fifth text is our place on Bhumandala is subjectively at its center. When we experience the mandala of the solar system, we experience ourselves being at its center. Even though we know, when we think about it, people say, oh, geocentrism is not correct. It's correct. And that doesn't mean that heliocentrism is incorrect. Heliocentrism is correct. When we think about the solar system and see how it looks from a third perspective, then we can see it heliocentric. That's why he says that the dimension of the Bhumandala is based on it being centered in the sun. And the size of it extends all around the sun as far as the sun's energy can extend. But when we experience the solar system ourselves, we experience ourselves at the middle of it. So the fundamental structure of Bhumandala is Bhu Mandala. It's the mandala organized around Bhu, which is our place of existence, which also is not exactly Earth. This island that we inhabit is special. Shuka compares it to a beautiful round lotus, Kuvalaya Kamala. This globe is at the center of a collection of orbits, Samavartula. These orbits are spaces within spaces, Kosha Abhyantara Kosha. Concentrically revolving circles subjectively centered upon the human observer. Keeping the lotus bud metaphor, he describes these orbits as each having an outstanding location, making them seem like lotus petals surrounding the flower. Yatha Pushkarapatram. These leaves or petals probably refer to the 7 observable planets orbiting in our sky at concentrically decreasing speeds. Shuka briefly attempts to describe the dimensions of their orbits, saying simply, Niyutta Yojana Vishala. You're going to hear the word Yojana a lot. Niyutta Yojana Vishala, meaning that their extent defies conventional measurement. A yojana is an ancient unit of measurement. According to Vishnu Purana, it is the length of 8,000 dhanu. A dhanu is the length of a typical archery bow, which is 4 hasta. A hasta is the length of a typical forearm in the hand, which people tend to say is about 18 inches or 45.7 centimeters. This would make a dhanu about 1.83 meters long, which would make a yojana of 14.6 kilometers. But it's, I'm going to mention today, as you can see, a bow, an arm, they're not standardized terms. The Purana does standardize the size units to an atom. But the measurement of an atom itself is a very difficult thing. And if you are slightly wrong in the atom, then when you get to multiples of thousands and 10,000s and hundreds of thousands, the difference becomes quite significant. So the exact length of the yojana varies, and in fact we find it used differently by geographers versus astronomers in ancient and classical India. So we find geographers tend to use a smaller version of a yojana, which is around 4 or 5 kilometers, where we find... so, for example, you'll find those kind of uses of yojana on the stone inscriptions that talk about how far away certain kingdoms are. And the astronomers like Aryabhatta, I think Varaha Mihira, they use longer, or Bhaskar, they use longer yojanas for astronomical things. They use like a 14-kilometer yojana. How many of these yojana? So even we have yojana being a kind of flexible measurement term. Then he says, the way that he describes the number of them, how many of these yojana are needed to measure the revolving spaces of Bhumandala? Sukha says niyutta yojana. The word niyutta literally means doubtful to calculate correctly. It means you probably won't be able to figure it out. That's what the word literally means. Niyutta. You have to turn away from calculating it. You have to give up on calculating it. It's the literal meaning of the word. It's usually used for very large numbers in the millions and above, where precise accuracy is not as important as the basic sense of enormity. What Shuka clearly intends to say, I don't know, how do you spell this word? I'll figure it out one day. What Shuka clearly intends to say is that these orbits of Bhumandala are so large that they defy accurate calculation. The key points about the structure of Bhumandala. One, our place in this Bhumandala is on Bhu. We're subjectively at the center. The shape of our place is spherical. The shape of the whole Bhumandala is a collection of round things, but not necessarily spherical. It's more disc-like. But it's a disc-like collection of round things moving in circles. The shape of our place is spherical. The other things orbit around us at huge distances, and those things form concentric revolving rings around us. Okay, now the new stuff. Let's go back and listen to the text itself for 1 second. Got today's stuff now. So he says, Yasmin Nava Varshani. Yasmin means in this. So in this, in what? In that lotus bud in the middle. He moved his description from the whole Bhumandala to the lotus bud in the middle. And now in this lotus bud, there's 9 sections. Yasmin Nava Varshani. Nava Yojana Sahasrayami. Each one of those sections has an ayama of 9,000 yojana. Here he seems to have actually given a number, but the word sahasra, will also look it up and see what it really means. And I'm not yet sure exactly how to utilize this number 9,000 yojana. We'll figure it out after reading more texts about the other 8 varshas. So in this lotus, there's 9 sections, all of which expand for 9,000 yojana, and which have 8 borders between them. Ashtabhir Maryada, Giribi, by let's say mountains. Giri generally means a mountain. So by mountains, Suvi Bhaktini Bhavanti, which make these different sections very, very different from each other. Suvi Bhaktini. Bhakti means to join. And vibhakta means to separate. And suvibhakta means really separate. So it might be referring to a concept like there's a place called India, and then there's a mountain range called the Himalaya, and then there's another country on the other side of it, like China. But it's really difficult to get from India to China or from China to India. It might mean something like that. Or it might mean something else. We need to read more texts before we make our judgment about exactly what these varshas are. So just keep the possibilities open for now. In this island in the middle of Bhumandala, 9 fields extend for 9,000 yojanas each. Their 8 borders become very clearly differentiated by mountains. There's an important point I want to mention here. No, it's not Shukra, it's Shuka. Shuka, the son of Vyas. Let us switch over to this so you can hear this important point. So here in this statement that we just looked at, the Bhagavatam makes the point that the earth is the solid place at the center of Bhumandala. Shuka says the region of Bhumandala that we inhabit, at the subjective center of its center, is known as Ilavrta. This name literally means contained flow. Vrta means to cover and contain or envelope or keep, constrict. And Ila means to flow. So this is a very interesting name for the world that we live in. Basically, it's a name for Earth. It's a very interesting name for Earth. Modern cosmology also says that the Earth and other planets formed by gravity constricting the flow of particles that are constricted initially by the sun. We could proceed with the safe assumption that Shuka refers to what we call Earth when he uses the term Ilavrta, but we may change that opinion when we've heard the rest of when we hear what he says about the other varshas. So for now, we're proceeding with this concept. But it's very interesting that the Puranic sense of the planet, the place that we live on, is that it's where the flow of energy has been constricted. So it's where things have been solidified, where the mass has been accumulated. That's what Ilavrta means. Now, the next text has a lot in it. So let's go look at that one. Esham madhye Ilavrtam nama abhyantara varsham yasya nabhyam avastita sarvata sauvarna kulagiri rajo meruhu dvipayama samunnaha karnika bhuta kuvalaya kamalasya murdhani dvatrimshat sahasra yojana vitato mule sodashasham tavad antarbhumyam pravishtaha. So of these fields, madhye in the middle is Ilavrta nama, is the one named Ilavrta. When we looked at the name already. Abhyantara varsham yasya nabham avastita. This is really important to get these terms clear. In the nabhi means the core, the center, the hub of the circle is the nabhi. We say the navel is the nabhi of the body. the belly button. When you have a wheel, the hub is the nabi. When you have a sphere, the core is the nabi. So here he says the nabha avastita. So it's not just the core, but it is avastita, which means descending into the core, descending through the core. Abhyantara varsh, within this varsha, within this place. This will solve every problem about how people misunderstand Meru. This is something which is within the earth, Meru. Abhyantara varsha, it's within Ilavrita. And it goes right through its core. It actually is the core. Sarvata Suvarna, entirely radiant. Some people say that means completely made of gold. Kulagiri Raja. Some people say this is the biggest of all the mountains. But we'll see that it also means the most important geographical structure. It also means the brightest thing. Meru. The name of it is Meru. Dvipayama Samunna. So look, he said this thing called Meru, it's within the island. It's within the Varsha. It's within Ilavrita. At the core of it, and then he says it extends from the core. Dvipayama Samunna. From the core, it extends out the entire diameter of Ilavrita. And Karnika Bhuta, thus it establishes the center. Karnika means the middle, the center. The middle of something is the Karnika. The middle of the lotus is a Karnika. Karnika Bhuta, it creates the Karnika of Ilavrita. It creates the center of this world. Kuvalaya Kamalasya, it's like the Karnika of this Kamala. Like the center of the lotus, it creates the center of this lotus bud world. Now, a very interesting thing he says about it. Murdhani, Murdhani. So Murdha means a peak or the top of something, but not a peak like this. Murdha refers to like a big dome or a canopy or an umbrella structure. And it's paired with the word vitata, which means diffused. So it's not collecting to a peak, but this structure is strange because as it proceeds out from the center, it diffuses. So a regular mountain, as it proceeds from the root, it collects to a peak. But Meru is the opposite. As it proceeds from its base, it expands. That's very amazing. But he's saying from the middle of this Varsh, it starts in the inside Ilavrita. Abhyantara Varsh, it starts at the core inside Ilavrita as a little point. And then it diffuses as it goes till it gets to the edge where it's 32,000 yojanas in arc. And then Mule can mean based on the. I'm thinking maybe there's some mathematical formula for determining the arc from radius, and if that's so, then Mule could be based on. But Mule also means to the base, to the root. Sodashahasram. So this word means, Sodash means 16, Sahasra basically means 1,000. So 16,000, I guess, yojanas, but it might mean also 16,000 as a multiple. But I'm thinking that the height of the Bhumandala, the height of the Meru is 16,000. So it would be the radius. But this doesn't match with what he's said before about 9,000 for the entire Varsha. But he did say that there's this space in between the Varshas. So, he didn't give a dimension for. So the Bhumandala's influence, the Ilavrata's, Meru's influence may extend out into space to this distance. So, but basically what it looks like, the geometry of what he's explaining, it looks like he's got, say, an upside down triangle from to this flat line from the point, it would be 16,000, and then across the top would be 32. That's kind of what I think he's saying. But the important point is that he says antar bhumyam pravishta. It's from the middle of the Bhu. As you can see, I'm mistaking the Bhu and the Ilavrata terms often because the Ilavrata is the center of the Bhu. So the center of the Bhu is the same as the center of the Ilavrata. Meru is the center of the whole Bhumandala because Ilavrata is at the center and Meru is at the center of Ilavrata. So, at the center of these is the field named Ilavrata. At its center, penetrating down to its core, is the most important of all geographical structures, the entirely radiant Meru. It extends through the entire breadth of the island. It establishes the center of the central lotus of Bhumandala. Its peak diffuses to a 32,000 yojana canopy dome. As a result of encircling the center of Ilavrata for 16,000 yojana. Working translation. Let's read the key points from this. Guess what, folks? Meru is the equator. Did you figure that out? When you suddenly realize that, then everything else in the cosmology is all of a sudden going to be like, oh, duh. That makes sense. That thing that was impossible to believe all of a sudden makes sense. Did you figure that? That Meru is the equator? Meru is the origin of the Earth, and therefore the origin of our whole system of existence. Shuka describes Meru as a mountain, Giri. Let's talk about that first. The word Giri literally means something about which you will gir, or geet, something about which you will sing, something that is noteworthy, something that's praiseworthy. So mountains are called Giri because you notice them. But the actual meaning of the word Giri means very important. Something that's very important or something that's very big. So when he says that Meru is Kula Giri Raja, it also means it's the most noteworthy entity. But it's actually like a mountain because it's the rock and everything of the earth. But it may be more than rock. The most noteworthy entity. So he's identifying Meru as the most important part of Ilavrata's geography. It makes sense that he would describe it first. So he's really, what he's doing in his description is he showed you this picture of this whole solar system, and then he zoomed in on Bhu, which is subjectively the center of it, and then he zoomed in on Ilavrata, which is subjectively the center of that, and then he zoomed in on Meru, which is subjectively the center of Ilavrata. So this Meru is the center point of the whole universe, you can say, the whole system that we live in, the whole world. So it's the Giri. It's the most important point. So he's identifying Meru as the most important part of Ilavrita's geography. Don't forget, they're using metaphors to help you visualize. The word he uses for foremost, Raja, also means brightest. The word Raja generally means king, right? But the king is the king because the king is like a sun. It's like the sun planet. Everything orbits around the king, and the king provides energy and security for everything. So the king actually means one who shines on the people. And Raj is related with Rash, which is the Rashis. Raj means to be bright. So when he's saying Kulagiri Raja, in one metaphor he's saying it's the biggest mountain. But what he's also saying is it's the brightest point. So he's saying that Meru is noteworthy because of how bright it is. And in this regard, the next thing he says is Sarvata Sauvarna, which means entirely golden, but also means always shining. Suvarna means bright. Varna means your kind of color or brightness. Suvarna means really bright, very, very, very white, very bright. Sarvata Suvarna. Gold is called Suvarna because it's bright. It shines. So this is very interesting. Meru, it's the brightest point, and it's always bright. The word Meru, what about the name Meru? Like we understood the name Ilavrita means the coagulated spot. What does Meru mean? Meru itself means central. So, for example, Merudanda is what? Your spine. Think about that. It's the spine of the world. Merucheta is the spinal cord, the nerves. Merutarla is the spinal fluid. So Meru is something which the other things are built on, the central thing. If Meru is indeed a mountain of gold, then Shuka's description of it seems crazy. So many people will say, hey bro, smoke this or chant this and trip out on this. There's this gigantic upside down mountain of gold and we can't see it. Nobody saw it. Or the scientists are telling us it's not there. Let's go find it. So let's check out that possibility. If Meru is indeed a mountain of gold, then Shuga's description of it seems quite bizarre or crazy. Very good. Meru has a relation to the word meridian, Jonathan. For example, he says, Meru is at the center of the world, Abhyantara Varsha. Mountains are on the surface of the earth, not at the center. So if he really means that it's actually a mountain of gold, then why did he say it's at the middle of the earth? Now, scientists say the core of the earth is entirely metal. That's another thing that he might be talking about. The core of the Meru is the core of the earth, which is entirely metal. He says it permeates the entire extent of our world. Dvipayama samanna. That means it's as big as the earth. Right? He said Meru is in the core of Ilavrita and it extends for the entire extent of the diameter of Ilavrita. Now, if he means that this is actually a mountain of gold, then you will have a mountain on the surface of the earth that is as tall as the diameter of the earth. There is no known mountain as tall as the earth. If such a thing existed, it should not be hard to find, especially if it is made of solid gold. That's why people say, no, you just have to not believe the scientists. They're lying to us. Okay, we'll go on a journey, but look in the sky. Where is it? He says it creates... Also, you have to not believe Shuka then, because Shuka didn't say that it's a mountain on the surface of the earth. He says it creates the center of our lotus-like world. Karnika Bhuta Kuvalaya Kamalasya. Mountains don't define the center of the earth. He says it produces a huge dome as its peak. This is the most interesting part. Murdhani Dvatrimshat Sahasra Yojana Vitata. Mountains have narrow, pointed peaks, not domes that are vastly larger than their base. So you think that there's really a big, gigantic, upside-down golden triangle? That's not what he said. He says it encircles through the center of our world. Antar bhomyam pravishta. Mountains don't do this. And also, people I can see are not listening. It can't be under the ocean. It's everywhere throughout the whole world. Just listen carefully to what Shuka describes about it. It permeates the whole entire diameter of the world. Is Shuka and his Purana crazy? I don't think so. We just need to make the effort to carefully figure out what he's talking about. I think we're crazy. Is Shuka and the Purana crazy? Is the Purana cosmology crazy? No, we're crazy for thinking that he's talking about an upside-down triangle of solid gold that's sitting on the surface of the earth, going up into space for like 6,000 kilometers. It's not what he said. He said it's in this core, the center, and it comes out. Just because he says Giri doesn't have to mean that it's a mountain on the surface of the earth. And you can comprehend if you just take a second. This is your thing. Well, it's actually there, but we can't comprehend it. Bro, you can comprehend it. This scripture was spoken to you in Kali Yuga for you to comprehend. You can comprehend it. Just don't be lazy. And don't feel let down. I remember when I encountered a ghost when I was 16 or 17. I had a close encounter with the ghost. There was ectoplasmic residue and everything. And my father explained in exact detail how every single aspect of my experience was just normal physics. And a leaking ceiling during a thunderstorm. And I was so disappointed because I wanted a paranormal experience. But actually, folks, the real world is divine. You don't need a fantasy to experience God. God is real, and the real world is magic. You don't need to have an upside-down golden triangle in the sky. The Earth's equator with this core of molten metal and solid metal producing a magnetic field, that's magic. That's divine. So don't feel like, oh no, if I lose my irrational fantasy about spirituality, then I'll be left with nothing. You'll be left with real spirituality, which is much, much better than the fabricated spirituality. So let us take Shuka exactly at his word. Please, always take them exactly at his word. And take the Shastra, not the person explaining the Shastra. You have to get yourself qualified. You have to learn this stuff, so that you can check to see if it makes sense or not what you're being told. Always check the Shastra. No guru has any authority except what the Shastra bestows upon them. If I go to a school and I start teaching any damn thing I want, the teacher will say, "You're fired. You have to stick to the curriculum." Because the teacher has no authority outside of the Shastra. But all of the gurus of Kali Yuga have exploited this fact, have exploited you, and hidden this. So that you believe any damn thing that they say just because they keep you entertained and keep your dreams alive. And so you keep paying. But actually go to the Shastra. Skip all this nonsense. Go to the Shastra. Take Shuka's words exactly as they are and see what they mean. Here's what he said. Kula Giri Raja. It's the most important thing defining the structure of the earth. Okay. He said Sarvat Suvarna. It's the most consistently bright thing, or also it's completely metallic, or it's completely golden. 3, he said Nabhyam Avastita. Karnika Bhuta. It's the center upon which the earth is based. It's the core of the world. And then he said Abhyantaravarsham. It's in the earth. Andar Bhumya Pravishta. It defines the center of the earth by encircling it. It is the center of the earth. So what is your problem? Did you miss some of those points? If you're insisting that it's a mountain that you can't see because it's transdimensional or some wacky stuff. It defines the spherical surface of the earth by extending into a dome at its furthest point from the root and the center. This is really beautiful. It's at the center of the earth and it extends the whole diameter. And because it extends, it creates a dome structure. 2 domes, which means a sphere. There is a very well-known geographical entity that matches this description. The equator. Let's look at this again. The equator is the most important thing defining the structure of the earth. The center of the earth is what made the earth. It is the most consistently bright place on earth. And also, the center of the earth is completely metallic. The earth is based on it. All the coordinates, all the circle, all the globe, everything is based around it. It defines the center of the earth, and it also defines the radius and circumference of the earth. You can just learn geometry. 2 pi r. There you go. It is not crazy in the least. Thus, rather than thinking of Meru as an upside-down mountain of solid gold the size of the earth, right in the middle of a flat earth, let us take an equally literal interpretation, a more literal interpretation, and think of it as the center of the earth around which the earth is built and which manifests geographically as the equator, which indeed is smaller at its base, the Earth's core, than at its peak, the surface. Now, he gave some specific measurements, which, as I said, were really, really, it's difficult to understand. He gives 2 measurements for Meru, and he gave 1 for Ilavrita, or all the Varshas. He said there's a 9 related to all the Varshas, and then for Meru there's a 16 and a 32. And then all of these terms are in units of Sahasra Yojana. Let's see if we can make any sense of these numbers. You will be disappointed, I think, because I haven't really made too much perfect sense of these numbers. But let's at least talk about them. Typically, we think of Sahasra as 1,000. But Shuka previously explained that the numbers he will use are estimations of dimensions that boggle the mind, niyuta. And in fact, the literal meaning of Sahasra is very similar to niyuta. Sa means something that comes with, and hasra means astonishment, amazement, bewilderment. So the way that Sanskrit numbers work for really large numbers is they refer to them as things which are mind-boggling or difficult to calculate or can't really be accurate about this. It's too big. But here's a general figure. So don't expect people are like, the length of the year is 364 days. No, it's not. It's 364.2. No, it's not. It's 364.24. Like my son. This is what happens when you're OCD. So don't think like that. Like Shuka is not trying to deal on that level with things, and the numbers that he's giving are not like that. They're to give you the image of kind of the relative dimensions. But still, what 16, 9, and 32 refer to, I haven't really comprehended it yet. Further, we do not have an exact value to translate yojana. Historical documents show it used for a distance as small as 3.5 kilometers. The Puranica definitions place it a bit under 15 kilometers, but with some flexibility. Since 16 is half of 32, we might consider 32 to be the diameter of Ilavrita and 16 is radius. That's one option. The radius would extend from Meru's peak to its base, which he's saying here, Mule Shodasa Sahasram, 16k to the base. That diameter would extend from one peak through the base to the other peak. Murdhani Dvat Trimshat Sahasra Yojana Vitato Mule Sodasha Sahasram Tavarantar Bhumyam Pravishta. 32k passes through the base at the center of the earth, diffusing to both domes. That might be what he's saying. The reason why I'm a little uncomfortable with it is even using a geographical yojana, which is on the small side, like 3.5 kilometers, that's bigger than how we measure the earth. Another option, 16,000 yojana and 32k units. So he might be using one number as a divisor of another number. Numbers are very difficult to understand, especially in Sanskrit. You really have to have been in that culture and had like gone to the mathematics school to know how they use the words in those days, which I don't. So we're waiting on some clarity here. 16k yojana and 32k units produces a 500 yojana scale. 16 of those is very close to the currently accepted size of the Earth's radius at 13 kilometers per yojana. So that seems kind of promising, but yet it also seems kind of stretching the numbers a little bit. Another option is to use the cartographical scale for the yojana, and then 9 kilometers of these, 9,000 of these, which he mentioned as the size of Ilavrita, is very close to the modern measure of the Earth's circumference. So where he says there's 9 fields within Bu, and each one is 9,000 yojana, that number 9,000 yojana is about what we estimate, what we measure today to be the circumference of the world, if you use the small version of yojana. 32 yojana is also very close to the modern measure of the circumference of the Earth's atmosphere, which could be what they're referring to as the canopy dome. However, I feel I most likely have not understood Shuga's math and measurements for now. Exactly what these numbers measure remains to be determined. Perhaps since the measurements have already been said to boggle the mind, we may not get more exact clarification than what we have so far, which is Meru is huge. Its base is half the size of its peak, if he's even saying that. Its dimensions create the circumference of Ilavrita. So there's many things that are not clear, but the one thing that is crystal clear is that Meru is inside the earth, not on the surface of the earth. And it extends from the core out to the surface, establishing the center of everything. And therefore it's the equator. And then later when you hear stuff like the sun orbits around Meru, then now you're going to understand how somebody said earlier, maybe it has to do with the zodiac. Stephanie, I think it was Stephanie. Yeah. Actually, so Meru is the basis for the zodiac. Because the sun will oscillate around it, orbit around it. And that oscillation creates the measurability of the zodiac. Okay, so thank you so much. This was great, right? The one takeaway I wish that everybody will have is that Meru is the equator. And you will find that that this isn't like the same argument that people give about the zodiac. Like, Well, Victor Kara is the only one in the universe that thinks this, which is not true about the zodiac, and it's also not true about Meru. You'll find that this is really a widely accepted concept of Meru, that it's the equator. However, in the writings in the translation of Bhagavatam, which is most widely available, it's completely not treated as the equator at all. So this may come as news to people who have only encountered Meru through that venue. Thank you very much, everybody.